Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Guilty, where we look at games, movies, or whatever else strikes our fancy, then decide in our opinion whether it's good, bad, or a guilty pleasure. We're your hosts, Theron
and Kit.
This time around, we figured we would try something different with this, due to some of our previous reviews seeming a little bit repetitive. But since that doesn't need much explaining, let's move on to
Borderlands.
Borderlands is the first-person looter shooter which helped inspire future looter shooters of the genre, though none of which are half as enjoyable. Released on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 on October 2009, followed by releasing on PC the 26th of the same month. The game stood out by giving a cel-shaded design to its visuals, of which other games in the FPS genre more or less did not do. This difference was brought on supposedly by a prank where the shaders were changed from realistic shaders of the time to the iconic cel shading the game is now known for. At the time, the game was intended to have more realistic visuals, of which video can still be found of. Ultimately, they chose to go with the cel-shaded look and overall give the game a more cartoony design. Our history with Borderlands started when the game was new. With an interest in co-op games, Borderlands caught both our interests initially and we gave it a try, from which it became more or less a game we would play at least once a year due to interest in the series.
As mentioned previously, Borderlands uses a cel-shaded art style, which actually looks really neat, as not many games at the time were doing it, as well as having a worn-down, dusty look that makes sense for this sort of backdrop. The people also are of a cartoonish design that just seems to work for them. Though while the visuals look nice, they at the same time can also have some issues, primarily in the fact the screen can often end up with so much color on it due to the amount of particle effects that seeing anything in front of the player is basically impossible sometimes. Though, if you're someone looking into the enhanced edition of Borderlands, good news is some of the problems here have been fixed. While the particle effects are still there, some of the more hindering effects, such as muzzle flash when firing the weapons, has been modified in a way that makes it easier to see what is being aimed at, making less hassle when aiming.
Borderlands starts off with the voice of some greedy businessman teaching children the horrors of being a bus driver as he drops off either one person, or up to 4 people, or some people who might be clones of one another, very much showing that this old guy is rather senile as he spins the tale of these indeterminate individuals getting the help of some voice in their head telling them where to find a vault of super riches and make their mark on the world. To help the Vault Hunters on their journey, they are given the assistance of New You Stations, the magical ability to die and always end up reconstructed back so long as they have money.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
No.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
Which will be beneficial to the group or solo adventure as they trek around doing deeds of questionable moral integrity, usually consisting of killing bandits, killing skags, collecting weapon parts, shooting poop off of a wind turbine, saying hello to people, killing said people, starting a race war with an alien species once thought dead before coming to the climactic end where the Vault Hunters find out listening to voices in their head was probably not the smartest thing to do. The story keeps itself simple and straightforward. There's a vault of untold treasures on Pandora. Go find it. About as simple as one can get for a story. Along the way, the player will meet different people who live on Pandora, from a blind, crippled weapons developer to a doctor who isn't allowed to work on people anymore for reasons unknown, to a lady who's in a relationship with her audio journal. Possibly.
I wonder if any of them will be my friends. What? Why are you always so jealous of me getting new friends? I'm turning you off.
To help flesh out the lore of the world, the player can learn a bit more about the world through the quests the game gives them. It isn't much, but it is a little bit of a benefit for those who want more to enjoy. While the story itself gets some benefit from being simple, it isn't perfect. An example of this is the length of it as a whole. The main story can be completed in only a few hours, if side quests are ignored, most of which is spent going from point A to point B for the next part of the story. It is actually jarring how quick the main story comes to an end, actually. I feel caught off guard every time the end comes up, because it felt like there was more in between that. Turns out there wasn't. As well, the voice constantly helping the players out is kind of annoying. Yet almost every boss encounter will preface a variant of, "This is going to be the hardest challenge yet," as though the player couldn't guess that by the fact everything is trying harder and harder to kick their asses into the dirt. Then in the end, when the finale comes up, the vault is open and the story ends, the Vault Hunters get pretty much nothing, and it just ends.
Borderlands gameplay involves some light RPG elements, giving you a higher amount of health whenever you level up, along with a special class-based skill which can be used with the only limitation being a cooldown when it can be used. Each character's class skill is different and can be more beneficial than others depending on the situation. As well, the level system gives more benefits each level to increase the player's effectiveness as they play. The gameplay isn't too jarring, having quite a few of the standard first-person mechanics, though sometimes jumping would be a pain in the ass. In some spots that looked very much like they were easy to jump on top of, the game would just decide that wasn't how the task was meant to be completed, and other times scenarios where jumping didn't seem like the obvious option would suddenly work, though times like this were relatively rare. The weapon variety is nice, having choices between revolvers, pistols, assault rifles, SMGs, iridium weapons, shotguns, rocket launchers, and sniper rifles, all of which can get elemental effects or deal out extra damage, and some even shoot in different ways, such as a shotgun that can shoot its pellets out in a wavy pattern, or a shotgun revolver, also known as the Masher.
Known as the ghost gun, called that because it turns people into ghosts.
A minor problem, though, is how the weapons interact with the weapon proficiency mechanic. As you use weapons, you'll get better at using that type of weapon. The problem is that some of the weapons are just better than others early on. Unless the sniper rifle you pick up is semi-auto, the amount of time it takes to prep the next shot when you're trying to shoot an enemy makes using it frustrating. If you miss, you might as well change weapons to something else. The rockets feel woefully underpowered as well, leaving an SMG or even a simple pistol to kill faster because while the damage may not be as high, when damage per second is compared, you will usually kill so much quicker that it is just smarter to use one of them instead. The areas often require backtracking a lot, and to help out with this, Borderlands offers you the ability to drive vehicles, which is nice and can make traveling easier through the areas even after fast travel is unlocked later on. As well, the vehicles can be used to run over enemies, usually killing them instantly. Though they aren't perfect, as after the first area, the game sometimes will encourage vehicle combat. But using the guns on the vehicle is an awful idea. The accuracy is so bad that it has trouble hitting enemies right in front of the vehicle. It is actually easier to run people over with the vehicle than to shoot them dead, and when vehicle-to-vehicle combat comes in, most of the time you're better off hopping out of the vehicle to shoot the other vehicle because they'll die faster that way. It should be noted with how it is designed, the game is pretty good for trying to challenge yourself, be it by limiting yourself to a single type of gun throughout the entire run, or attempting to play through it without using shields. Though something to note as well is that not all the classes are equal in this regard. An example of this would be comparing Roland to Mordecai for a no-shield run. Mordecai can begin healing at level 11 on his own just by killing enemies. Roland, on the other hand, would be limited to healing using his turret before level 21 at a minimum. While this is mostly insignificant, it does mean one character would have an easier time naturally than others. It seems worth noting that this review is of the base game, not including the DLC. There is a reason to this. In many cases, games will use DLC to improve on the game where people criticize it, often choosing to add details to cover up plot holes or attempting to give a different reason to speak about the game. We've all heard someone say at this point, the old DLC really improved the game argument. The problem with this is that you shouldn't have to pay for DLC to get what the initial game already should have given, a quality product. The main game should be good enough that you want more of it, rather than DLC being something necessary to make the game whole. The Enhanced Edition has made some changes to the gameplay a bit, though for the most part, most of it is just small quality of life changes, such as quests where you are collecting objects are completed quicker with more people that you're playing with. Though some downsides is that the vendors are a lot more random. Now, at first, random vendor inventory sounds good. But the only thing that we could find that seemed to actually be random is the levels of weapons. To finish off, just a small nitpick was the addition in the Enhanced Edition of the shift chests. They're a nice addition, don't get me wrong on that. The problem is the weapons they have is a pretty small loot pool. Small enough that with just the keys awarded for having the other games in the series, it was possible to get multiple duplicates. But not just multiple duplicates of the legendary drops from the chests. At one point, one of our inventories was filled with nothing but weapons with the exact same stats and weapon parts thanks to the drops from the chest, and even one time got the exact same weapon twice with the exact same key.
In my opinion, Borderlands 1 has aged relatively well. Though it isn't perfect, gun balance is all over the place, traces of a more serious game seems to be there still, and sometimes the design kind of isn't sure of itself. The negatives are there, and some of them can be annoying, but that's about it. Annoying. There really aren't any game-breakingly bad elements to it, and most of the annoying stuff is completely avoidable by player choice. All in all, I'd say the game is still good, though admittedly not as good as its sequel. My opinion to add to this, when speaking of the Enhanced Edition as well, I would say it seems to be improvements rather than downgrades. I disagree with some of the chosen quality of life changes, as they make the game easier than it was prior in ways that really didn't need to be made easier. An example of this is the waypoint now will direct the player exactly to the location of some items, such as skulls on spikes for one quest, in which it was prior a bit of a search task, where the player would search around for the items. Now the game just gives the player the exact location of the skulls one after the other.
While it may be rough around the edges in a few spots, in my opinion, like the weapon proficiency or just the map overall while driving, I still love going back and replaying and revisiting spots in this game. But overall, I'm gonna have to say this game is more guilty pleasure for me, as I don't play it as often as the later games in this series.